violated. Places you shop and eat in restaurants and stuff, photographs and little tidbits about conversations overheard and what TV station was on in the place, etc. But it was also banal and trite, and in some places just downright silly. I mean, one might ask, with the mapping, it already exists. It's called the Yellow Pages. I mean, I'm not quite sure what was in there that was worth the informants who were suborned into helping compile it, or the agents who were sent undercover into the field to do it. I mean, did I miss something? Is there some actual value to these things, or is this an exercise that they maybe hope will be leaked so that people will feel intimidated?
The FBI special agent in charge in Newark said exactly the same thing, that investigations that aren't based on articulable, individualized suspicion are worthless, and produce information that's not helpful to the investigation. Marcy Wheeler, who writes for a blog called Empty Wheel, did a great analysis of that NYPD reports and determined that some known terrorists, people who were later uncovered as terrorists, Zazi and Shahzad with the Times Square bomber, were both within the communities that the NYPD was mapping and surveilling, and yet they were not identified through that process. So, you should be worried both that these resources are targeting completely innocent people and producing information that isn't helpful and is actually getting in the way of and impeding serious law enforcement efforts.
One of the things that I found humorous was that the location of interest book on the Egyptians has a whole bunch of demographic pages in the beginning, taken completely from our website, but they are the very pages that we threw out because the methodology that was used to compile them was false, and we found that they were misleading numbers. But they're still in the NYPD book on here's the numbers of the Arabs, blah, blah, blah. I mean, and I looked at it and I said, if that indicates the level of the intelligence that went into putting this together, then we're in trouble.
Right, and the Associated Press also did great reporting on it, where they talked to some of the individuals who were documented in these reports. And one gentleman said, they're correct that I'm Syrian, but I'm actually a Christian and not a Muslim. And they could have come in and asked me, and I could have given them the correct information. But they didn't. They instead used this surreptitious method of gathering intelligence, and what we find from that is that it produces bad intelligence. You make bad assumptions based on people's ethnicity or nationality or national origin, and that leads to bad assumptions. But once that information goes in the intelligence system, it can never be corrected. There's no process for reviewing it and making sure it's correct. So actual harm can come to people who are incorrectly identified in these intelligence reports as being aligned with some group or other that they're not.
So this is the nexus between profiling and surveillance in its crudest form. And I'm going to switch over to you on the issue of the profiling and surveillance issues.
I want to just on the note about New York, Congressman Peter King recently during a press interview on NYPD and what was happening, and particularly New Jersey's complaint in terms of the jurisdictional issues, so we're happy to have complaints at least that question this. But in the interview, he took issue with the journalist who asked him the question on the point about this being profiling. He was very adamant, this is not in fact profiling, which is, of course, not surprising given Congressman King's sort of attitudes and perceptions about this. But there is, presumably, in our own government, Department of Justice does not allow profiling. So how is it that, sort of a big picture piece on this, how is all of this happening with federal dollars?